We're actually the fourth largest prosecution agency in the country, and that means that if a felony happens within Maricopa County, the chances are pretty good, in fact, over 90%, that my office will be handling it. Every case we take comes to us after a law enforcement agency, be it Chandler or another one, has done their investigation and submitted it to us for charges. And from there, we take it to prosecution. And those cases cover just about anything you can imagine, from homicides, drug trafficking, family violence, and sex crimes. The list goes on, but among those cases are crimes committed by minors, and that's why we're here tonight. I want to talk about the rise in juvenile crime and how it's impacting our schools, our neighborhoods, and our families. I really wish we could be home tonight and not having this conversation, that we didn't need to have the conversation, but I can tell you, as the head of that agency, we need to have this conversation. So before we begin with our guest speakers and panel discussion, I want to start off by thanking our community partner, Fry's Food and Drug, for their generous donation that allowed us to provide some light beverages and refreshments for this evening. So thank you, Fry's. And I want to recognize Nicole Farnsworth with the City of Chandler, who secured this venue for us with very comfortable seats, I might add, so stay awake, right? And made sure all of our needs are taken care of. I also want to recognize Supervisor Mark Stewart. Mark, you want to wave or stand up? Mark's tall, he can get away with waving, but I'm short, I have to stand up or nobody sees me. Mark is on the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, and he represents this district, District 1, which includes Chandler. If you want to continue this important conversation, Mark Stewart is hosting a Teen Violence Mental Health Summit this Friday, 2 days from now, and that is at the ASU Polytechnic campus in Mesa. And so more details are available on flyers at our booth. I also want to give a shout out to Chandler Mayor Kevin Hartke. Kevin, do you want to wave? Thank you for your support. And then also Councilmember Matt Orlando, are you here? Yes. Thank you very much for coming. And we are also honored to have Chandler Police Chief Brian Chapman with us this evening. Chandler PD is an excellent partner in the criminal justice system with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. They do great work. They are responsive. And so, Chief, thank you for taking the time to address this important issue and for your commitment to keeping Chandler and really Maricopa County safe. So I'd like to invite Chief Chapman to share a few opening remarks.
Good evening. On behalf of Mayor Hartke and our elected officials and men and women of the greatest police department on planet Earth, I want to welcome you to the Chandler Police Department Public Safety Training Center. Chandler is a wonderful community. Over 90% of the people surveyed in Chandler feel safe. I'm very proud of the commitment that we have to partnerships and community safety. But when it comes to teen violence is not inevitable. In fact, it can be very preventable if we have partnerships in a number of areas. There's no one singular entity that is going to solve this issue for our community. This takes police and prosecution, this takes schools, this takes nonprofits, and this takes accountability. One thing that I'm very proud of here in the city is our program that we're targeting at the 6th grade level. We have a robust SRO program with the Chandler Unified School District, a great partnership with them. But we, about 2 years ago, started a program called C program, which is targeting the 6th graders. And for that age group, we're really being intentional on a 4-week program where we're talking about bullying, we're talking about cyber stalking, we're talking about mental health, success strategies, leadership. And more importantly, we're talking about peer accountability. We know that some of the most influential people in a teen's life is another teen. And so if we can start, the earlier the better, talking about good decision making and critical thinking skills and problem solving, then the hope is that that goodness is going to spread throughout. So there is no one perfect place for all of these things to reside, but as long as we continue working forward for progress, we will continue that path forward. I'm also proud of our community partnerships last year with the Justice for Preston Lord Foundation and the Chandler YMCA. We partnered to train over 100 teenagers in CPR and first aid to extend the life of people in crisis. On the night that Preston was murdered, it was CPR that allowed his family a few more precious moments to be with him at the hospital. And so sometimes this is about awareness, sometimes this is about a tangible skill set that we can teach teenagers to extend the life of another in crisis. So we're proud of that. We're really proud of our partnership with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, and Rachel Mitchell has been an outstanding partner when we've tried to move anything forward in that program. So with that, I'll kick it back over to you, County Attorney, and thank you all for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Chief Chapman, for your leadership and for really sharing your perspective. Hearing from law enforcement gives us an important view of what's happening on the ground. And I also want to share with you what we're seeing on the prosecution side at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. So if you take a look at the screen, what you're looking at is a graph of juvenile cases referred to our office from law enforcement agencies across the valley, so at Maricopa County, over the past 8 years. So this first year here is fiscal year 2017. You'll notice the numbers dipped during the pandemic, but then they started climbing again, although they are not up to the pre-pandemic levels. But the next slide is why we're here. This is the same data where you are removing out and focused on violent crimes committed by juveniles. This is where you can see the statewide proportion of juvenile violent and weapons-related referrals compared to total referrals by fiscal year. The violent crimes included in this data set include aggravated assault along with first and second-degree murder. This chart alone makes it clear that the trend is not limited to Maricopa County. It is across Arizona, and really, based on stats I've seen, it's across the United States. Juvenile crimes are becoming more violent, and they increasingly involve weapons. I want to be clear, these are not cases of kids being kids. We're talking about drug ripoffs where teens illicitly sell marijuana vapes or cartridges, and the exchanges turn into robberies when buyers attempt to steal the product. It's not uncommon for those to result in the homicide of one or the other party. Similarly, we also see gun sale rips occur when minors attempt to buy firearms illegally and end up being robbed themselves. Swarming attacks, where a group gangs up on one person. Car thefts, where we later find guns inside the stolen vehicles. And by the way, if you have a gun, please do not leave it in your car. That is what juveniles oftentimes are looking for when they break your window to get in your car, is they're looking for your gun. Please take it in the house and secure it. It also includes aggravated assaults, sometimes with parents not only encouraging their kids to fight, but in some cases actually joining in. What's most concerning about these crimes is the growing aggression and the readiness, almost the eagerness to use weapons. It is incredibly alarming, and we have to stop these dangerous patterns before they carry over into adulthood. Our job at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office is to hold people accountable regardless of their age. But here's the challenge. Arizona law is not where it needs to be when it comes to addressing juvenile violence. Even with serious crimes, the way the law is written often leads to lighter consequences than the public might expect. And that's where much of the frustration begins. That's where a lot of my frustration begins. When it looks like, quote, we let them off easy, the truth is we are following exactly what the state law requires and what it limits us to. What many people don't realize is that juvenile cases move through a completely different process than adult criminal cases in our justice system. That's why our office is working closely with legislators to strengthen Arizona's juvenile laws so that there is accountability and real consequences for violent acts committed by minors. As many of you know, my office supported Preston's Law earlier this year. This law is an anti-swarming bill named in honor of Preston Lord. And I want to thank his dad and stepmom for being here, along with the Preston Lord Foundation representatives tonight. I also want to thank Representatives Matt Gress, who's in Legislative District 4, and Julie Willoughby, who is in Legislative District 13 out here in Chandler, for their leadership in making that law happen. It was an important step, but it's certainly not the last. Just the other week at Maryvale High School, a classroom altercation between two students stemming from the alleged robbery of a firearm that escalated into a deadly attack occurred. A student was repeatedly stabbed with a knife and later died at the hospital. This incident starkly illustrates that this is a real and an urgent problem that demands our attention. We at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office are going to continue to push for laws that give prosecutors and law enforcement officers the tools that we need to protect our community and deter young people from making choices that could ruin their lives and the lives of others forever. So tonight, we're here to come together to understand what's driving this increase in teen violence and to talk honestly about what we're seeing. So I'm very grateful for our panelists who have joined us tonight. We have experts from law enforcement, education, prosecution, and mental health to offer different perspectives and practical steps. So I encourage you to listen closely and take away something that you can put into practice at your home, your school, your church, or in the community at large. Because stopping this trend isn't something we can do alone, prosecutors and police officers. It's going to take every single one of us to make sure our young people choose better paths. So with that, before I begin the panel, I'd like to welcome Kim McWilliams to the stage. Kim is a licensed professional counselor, and she's a clinical leader with a heart for helping kids, teens, and families thrive. With over 2 decades of experience in behavioral health, Kim has led innovative programs that support young people through life's toughest challenges, from trauma and anxiety to navigating school and relationships. As the clinical director at Not My Kid, Kim designs and oversees youth-focused mental health programs that are compassionate, evidence-based, and culturally aware. So we've asked Kim to join us tonight to help us understand why we're seeing teen violence escalate and to give us insight into what might be going on in the minds of our young people and who are making these choices and how we can address it. So come on up here, Kim.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay tonight? All right, good. So thank you for joining us this evening on this very important topic. I'm really here to talk about youth mental health and the correlation with the recent upticks that we've seen in teen violence. Next slide, please. So with Not My Kid, a lot of the resources that I'm going to be talking to all of you about tonight are listed up above, and you're welcome to check out any of these and talk with me a little further about them. But the Partnership to End Addiction, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, SAMHSA, Arizona Department of Public Health, Arizona Youth Survey, and Arizona Youth Risk Behavior Study are some of the different sources that I'll be discussing tonight. Next slide. So when we're talking about mental health, it's so important, not just with ourselves, but with our kids, to be looking at how are we exercising that mental health muscle? What are we doing to check that gauge to ensure that not just ourselves, but our kids are doing okay? So when I look at mental health and I look at being able to respond to stressful situations, I really see mental health as the ability to respond to life challenges in a healthy way. It's that opportunity. So we can either be excelling, we can be thriving, we can be in survival mode, that fight or flight, we can be struggling with our mental health, or we can be in a full-blown crisis, which is why we're here tonight. When we are at that place, we're not looking anymore at what our actions are doing to ourselves or our community. Next slide. So when we think about teen violence, we're looking at a situation where we might have stressors in an individual's life, these mental health concerns, and somebody that has good mental health that's able to cope with stress and those life challenges, they're able to respond in a healthy way to an unhealthy situation. So a very common concern, unfortunately, I hate to say it is common, but a lot of our youth could experience bullying. And a youth that has good mental health and self-care and that has a good support system, they might be able to react in that situation effectively. They might have a strong support, a parent, a teacher, somebody that they trust, they can go to for help. They might be able to verbally themselves stand up for themselves and have the confidence to do so. So what about the opposite? What about somebody that does have those feelings of depression and sadness, loneliness already, and they're triggered by something such as bullying? Well, this is where we see that that poor mental health might actually lead to a retaliation, whether that be physical or something else. The difference ultimately lies in that youth's ability to regulate their emotions when they're triggered in that emotional situation. Their ability to assess the situation, the consequences of their actions, and the ability to seek support are imperative. Next slide. So when I look at the brain, and not only have I worked with youth for the past 20 years with children and their families, yes, I'm a parent too, and I have to remind myself of this very, very important point. Parenting only gets more intense as your child gets older. When they reach those teen years, yes, there's resistance, of course there is. Naturally, they're going to push against your rules, and this is where they need them the absolute most. It is the healthiest thing that you can do as a parent to set those boundaries and limitations. Why? Did you know that our brain is not actually fully developed until we're 25? So if you think of that, 25 years old, that teenage brain does not have full adult decision making. They're not able to fully plan ahead, anticipate risks, regulate their emotions, problem solve in the way that we can as adults. That's something that's very important to remind ourselves. So when that teen pushes back, and it's just the worst thing in the world to give them that consequence and have to enforce it, remember that. They are not fully developed yet, and they need that. Next slide. So when we're looking at mental health, what really increases that place from going from being stressed out to having a full-blown mental health diagnosis? We know that there are many contributing factors. We take into consideration family history of mental illness, environmental stressors that youth has been through, any traumatic life events, COVID, all of our teens have experienced that, being or feeling socially isolated, having experienced any losses in their lives, if there's substance use in the household or if they're using substances, those also contribute to mental health issues, and bullying is really huge. Next slide. So when we surveyed Arizona youth, these are teenagers in the valley, and we asked them about stress. And remember, I said stress can be that precursor to having a full-blown mental illness. 27% of our teens actually reported feeling a high level of stress every single day. 31% said that they felt overwhelmed as a result of the stress, unable to cope, not knowing what to do about the stress. 34% of our youth feel that the next school year will be even more stressful than their current school year. And this statistic blew me away. 83% of our youth surveyed about stress said school is their primary stressor. Next slide. I want all the parents in the room to take a look at this. One of the number one questions I get asked when working with parents when they have concerns over their child's behavior is, looking up here, this is the response I get. So somebody might get referred to counseling or behavioral health services by their teacher, by a doctor, by somebody else in the community that says, hey, I think that this behavior is a concern. These are the common myths that parents often report to me. It's not a big deal. Minimizing that behavior, it's just a phase. We all went through it, we'll outgrow it. It's not my kid that has the problem. Kind of deflecting that ownership and accountability of whatever that behavior was. So I know that this is not a popular thing to talk about, but I thought it was really worth bringing that attention, because sometimes as parents we want to protect, right? Our kid does something, we think, oh, you know, they're a good kid. They didn't mean to do that, or it wasn't them. I want you to really think about that, because it is somebody's kid that's doing these things, and it is somebody's kid. We all need to be concerned. Next slide. So what happens if we leave this stress, this mental illness unchecked? How do you know as a parent? We often see that our kids start to avoid situations. School, if that's a primary stressor, they don't want to go. That's when those stomach aches happen, those illnesses happen, every excuse not to go to class. Misdirected and inappropriate anger, using rage or aggression to mask sadness or release other difficult emotions they're experiencing. Social media overuse. What is overuse these days? Really, when we look at social media overuse, it's the inability to stop and put that device down and walk away and do your day-to-day responsibilities and activities. So that's when we look at overuse. It interferes with your responsibilities day-to-day. This can also take the form of disordered eating. If you notice that your child is gaining weight, are they losing weight? Are they restricting? This could be a form of self-control when they don't know what to do to get themselves back in control. Self-harming behavior, cutting, burning, picking, it's a way to release feelings of pain, tension, and anxiety. Substance use. We see kids turning to substance use as a way to cope with feelings of depression, anxiety, despair. They're using substances for all the wrong reasons. Instead of using their medication, we see them that they're going outside of that to use illegal drugs. Next slide. So what can we do? You as parents, you're going to know what's best for your kiddo. These are just some examples of things that we can do as a family to get involved. When we have mental illness, we're inactivated. We have withdrawn from doing things that are really pleasurable. We want to get activated again out there in the community. And we know that these things help. Encouraging your child to volunteer, to do something for somebody else, that actually gives them a sense of purpose. It makes them feel valued. Making sure that they do have time in the day where they are unplugging from electronics, turning the video games off. Practicing mindfulness, journaling, listening to music. Practicing presence. What does that mean? Practicing presence is the ability to just sit and be. Think about those conversations, those great conversations you have with your kid. I know some of the best conversations I've ever had are when we put those phones down, nobody's distracted by notifications, and you can just enjoy each other in that moment. Have family dinner. Getting involved in exercise activities, different sports, having a social connection with friends. Yes, as teenagers, that is imperative to good mental health. Next slide. So when we're looking at this again, I just want to recap some signs that parents could be on the lookout for when we know that there is a concern. If your child is starting to either express or you observe them withdrawing and those feelings of loneliness, chronic mental health and physical issues such as them complaining about headaches, stomach aches, not feeling well all the time, not wanting to do those activities such as go to school, the quality of their relationships is declining. The first thing we notice is they've fallen out with their friends. That's something to keep an eye on. Grades are slipping. Substances, either you're finding paraphernalia or there's different signs and symptoms that you can observe in your child. You know when they're acting differently. Pay attention to their eyes. If they're avoiding eye contact when they come home, we want to all pay attention to that. And then, of course, any self-harming behaviors and or expressing any suicidality. Next slide. We all can take steps. I don't want anyone in this room to be afraid to have these difficult conversations with their teen. We can approach and assess, asking your child if they're okay, asking them outright, do you feel like hurting yourself? That's not going to cause self-harm. That's not going to cause them to commit suicide. That's showing them that you're there and you care and you're ready to listen. Listening without judgment, using empathy, encourage professional help. It's okay. It's okay to not know what to do. If you're feeling like this is beyond something that you're able to tackle, it's okay to reach out to different organizations and get that behavioral health support. And encourage self-help. This does not mean, hey kiddo, sorry you got yourself into that, you're on your own. That's not what self-help means. It means talking to your child about responsibility and of, hey, you may not have caused this problem, but it is up to you to fix it, and I'm here for you. I'm here to guide you. I'm here to support you. We'll get through this together. Next slide. So, as a parent, what do we do when our child is acting a certain way behaviorally, when they're pushing our buttons? You all know what I mean. You take a deep breath. That's the first thing. And I want you to think of the 3 R's. You yourself need to regulate in that moment, find a way to relate to your child, and reason with them about what the right path is. Your kids are listening to you. We know that it's actually not so much the verbal of what you're saying in that moment, it's how you say it to them, whether you're saying it in a calm, relatable way, and it's your nonverbals, your expressions, your body language, your posturing. All of that stuff's really important when you're having these deep conversations. I like the acronym WAIT when I'm talking to a teenager. WAIT stands for, why am I talking? Are you just waiting for that moment that you can interject, or are you truly listening to what your child has to say? So remember that WAIT. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, Not My Kid is one of many organizations in the Valley we're here to support. There are many organizations out here today with resources that can help support your families and your teens. That's the QR code. You can find our website, and then I will be available on the panel, and I'll be available after as well to answer any questions that you have. So thank you very much for having me tonight.
Kim, thanks so much for sharing that insight with us tonight, and I'm glad you're staying as part of the panel to help us answer more questions and continue this conversation. So let me start now by introducing you to the rest of our panel of experts. So Karen, first we have the Chief of the Juvenile Crimes Division at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. This is Karen Pugh. And when you'll hear her accent, you can guess where she's from originally. Next, we have Chandler Police Officer Stephen Dew, who is the president of the Arizona School Resource Officers Association. And finally, we have the Director of School Safety and Security for Mesa Public Schools, Al Moore. And Al and I worked together when I was a Sex Crimes Bureau Chief out in the Mesa office of the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, and he was a sergeant with Mesa PD, so. All right. And Kim is going to join us as well. Okay. Karen, we are seeing more violent juvenile cases referred to our office, but some of those don't result in prosecution. So can you explain why that is and what legal limitations that you have to work with?
Well, good evening, everybody. Now maybe you can understand where I'm from. It's nice to be here this evening and talk to you about this very important topic. So we, at times, may not charge cases that can be very distressing for victims. But we have a charging standard that we have to adhere to, and that's that we have a reasonable likelihood of conviction. And that's an ethical standard for us. We realize that we need to be able to prove our case in the court of law, and we need to prove our case based upon legal standards and legal rules. It must be a fair process that we have in the court system. And we also realize as prosecutors that when we charge someone with a misdemeanor, it's a very big deal. These have real consequences for those that we charge with misdemeanors. And absolutely, we realize that charging people with a felony is also a big deal. So we take our ethical duties very, very seriously. We can also at times do what we call furthering a case. So basically what we do is we send that case back to the agency, law enforcement, that submitted the case to us, and we might ask them, hey, we need you to do a little bit more work. We think we're close, but we need you to either interview some other people, we need you to ask some additional questions, we might need you to collect some additional evidence or do some scientific testing, and we will then receive that case back with the additional evidence, and we will then again assess the case to see if we can charge the case. Now then, this can also be frustrating for victims and for their family members because all of this takes additional time. But the reality is when we charge these cases, we want to make sure that we are doing them the right way and that we have everything that we need so that we can hold the juveniles accountable, so that we can move forward with the prosecutions and that we have everything that we need. So we really make sure that we do this in an ethical way. We want cases to stick so that we can hold the juveniles accountable for their actions.
Stephen, you've worked closely with students across many campuses. What changes have you observed in teen behavior over the past few years, and what stands out as different or more dangerous now?
Well, thank you for having me here today, and also thank you for the collaboration that the Maricopa County Attorney's Office has contributed to training of school resource officers throughout the state in participation in our previous training conference that we had this summer. Thank you. Some of the changes that I've seen, we focus on data that impacts our actions. And so as the school safety program and the philosophy of the Arizona School Resource Officers Association and our national partners is that an officer is a mentor, informal teacher, and an approachable adult on campus. And some of the changes that I've seen in the last 20 years, I kind of compare it to when cell phones came into existence. I was a school resource officer when there were no cell phones. And then cell phones, suddenly I was shocked that a sixth grader had a cell phone. And then cameras were introduced. And cameras were a significant change that had to recalibrate their behavior And you probably saw that in the county attorney's office with the images that were being published and such. And I see that as a recalibration of their social progression. Like we saw what happened during the pandemic, and it was almost like they missed the opportunity to develop within their community. We focused on 7th graders and 9th graders. Those are transitional years. And it felt like those transitional years were bumped up. And so instead of just the 7th graders on the junior high level struggling with social interaction, struggling with what would be appropriate resolution of conflict, it was stretching into the 8th graders, and then subsequently on the high school level, 9th graders and 10th graders. And so we saw a great amount of that. We also saw an increase of students who were afraid to come to school. Our data shows that 14% of our school-age kids were at least once afraid to come to school because of fear for their physical safety. And so I think those changes, along with the advances in technology and social media, which we'll get into, have really impacted what I've seen evolved when it comes to student behavior.
So Al, how are Mesa Public Schools adapting to this rise in teen violence, and what proactive steps are being taken on campus to improve safety?
Thank you for having me, and I love this question because I am a grandfather. I have grandkids that are going through the public schools. My kids went through the public schools, and when we do student surveys, the number one thing that kids are worried about is school safety. When my granddaughter comes home and says she doesn't go to the bathroom at school because of all the drugs and violence that are going on in the bathroom, I'm like, holy cow, we got to do something about this. So we have several layers of security that we've implemented at Mesa Public Schools, starting with one point of entry for, we have the perimeter fencing, and then we have surveillance cameras. Kids don't typically do bad things when they're being seen. We have over 150 to 180 cameras at our high schools, and probably about 60 so at our junior highs, and we have them at our elementary schools as well. Feedback from principals is that's a huge deterrent when the cameras are up. Obviously, we can't put cameras in bathrooms, so we have vape sensors in our bathrooms. The vape sensors also detect loud screaming and yelling for like bullying activity, and it alerts the camera monitor so they can respond with a security team. The feedback that I'm getting from principals is that kids aren't hanging out in the bathrooms anymore because of that, which is a good thing. We have, obviously, our school resource officers, as Stephen was talking about. We work very closely with them and our security team to be very proactive, building relationships with these students so that they have a sense of comfort in reporting crimes or bullying or other violent activities or even just rule violations. We make that very easy, and we're going to get into that a little bit later.
So Kim, from your work with teens and families, what are the most common underlying emotional or psychological issues that lead to violent behavior?
So I think it's really important to recognize that when we've seen a teen act that way, conduct disorder, without a doubt, is generally the diagnosis at that point. But conduct disorder does not develop overnight. There are many opportunities as a youth is growing up to be able to intervene. And so we might see this early on, even at that kindergarten, first grade level, as what we call oppositional defiant disorder, where they are already rebelling against any rules, authority, not following directions, just over and above what we would typically see in a typical developing child. And then that leads to untreated depression, anxiety, and then as we get a little bit older, usually some of those precursors to conduct disorder are seen as just this willful oppositional behavior against law and authority. So we're seeing them, or early symptoms of stealing, hurting others, hurting animals is a huge sign. and really that lack of empathy for anything or remorse of what they've done. So I don't want to say that it's just this diagnosis leads to that behavior, but we certainly see conduct disorder, and we certainly see in a younger child opportunities to intervene.
Karen, I think a lot of people don't realize that there is a different goal of the juvenile justice system than there is of the adult justice system, and that is rehabilitation. So how does the juvenile system balance rehabilitation with community safety, especially when it comes to teens committing what we're talking about, serious or violent crimes?
Well, the juvenile system, thank you. The juvenile system, as you stated, is focused on rehabilitation, and that is the right focus for a lot of the juveniles that we deal with. And that's because we don't want a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old to think that they are a career criminal at that age. We want them to be able to change their behavior. We want them to rethink things and think of things in a different way, to deal with peer pressure in a different way, to deal with conflict in a different way, and to do things differently next time so that they don't progress through the criminal justice system. And we have rules that balance both between rehabilitation and community safety. So we have certain rules that the court adheres to, things that they take into account when they're making decisions with regard to the juveniles. But we also have, by the same token, for those that commit certain crimes and for those that are certain ages, they can be tried in the adult system. So if they commit serious offenses, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, armed robbery, discharging a firearm, drive-by shooting, and they're a particular age, 15, 16, 17, then they must be prosecuted in the adult system. When they go to the adult system, like you said, we're now dealing with a completely different system. In the juvenile system, it's the commissioners that determine sentences, determine consequences for the juveniles, and they can choose whatever it is that they want to choose. Could be an essay, could be a letter of an apology to a victim, could be working through a workbook, could be community service. It could include going to a juvenile prison. But on the adult side, judges have mandatory sentencing. And so for certain offenses, individuals are going to prison, and there is a certain range that the court must prosecute them with, sentence them to. So for these types of offenses, juveniles are moved out of the juvenile system, and they are moved into the adult system. So younger juveniles usually cannot move into the adult system, and we deal with them on the juvenile side because we are really focused on rehabilitation. So the rules themselves allow the court to make different decisions, and the age and the type of offense that the juvenile commits means that they may be moved out of the juvenile system into the adult system.
Now, Stephen, you mentioned social media earlier. Can you talk about the role you see social media playing in inciting or escalating incidents of violence among teens, especially with what we've seen lately, the swarming type attacks?
So I differentiate it between individually and as a community. I think as a community, the swarming type of events that take place promote or magnify the risky behavior or risky locations. And so even if a young person isn't involved directly in that, social media allows them to be a witness to it. And it perpetuates those risky behaviors and that negative climate online. Some other things that it does is it continues the violence. So we've all seen obvious situations where conflicts arise and students or youth are contending with another online back and forth, but it promotes it even further, and I think of a word, perseveration, perseveration, an event has taken place and looking back and you're just thinking about it over and over. I've been in situations where I thought I resolved the conflict or a violent event that took place. Somebody was assaulted, investigation was taking place, charges are being filed, and then the social media that was used to record this event allows those students to perpetuate it, to look back at that event and then pick apart the actions of others. And it can be such a dangerous, it's not a slope, it's a free fall as they're engaged in that. And I've seen students who had charges filed against the two of them, and they perseverate on that video, or what somebody else came back around and said, ooh, I have another angle from somebody else. And then those same students engage in a conflict again with weapons and more serious consequences. So it's just a magnifier that allows for this perpetuation of violent events if not addressed immediately.
Al, can you explain to us the process of reporting violent or bullying incidents that happen at school or during school hours?
Sure. So first thing we want to say is we encourage everyone to report. That is students, staff, parents, family members, community members. We have policies in place that that mandate that any school employee has to report to the administration if they suspect any type of bullying or crime of violence that has taken place. And then there's policies that the administrators have to follow to ensure a complete investigation. There's forms they got to fill out. The other part of that is we want to make it as easy as possible for people to report. So it can be as simple as reporting it in person to a staff member. We have a silent witness line that we monitor in the security department. That's a Mesa Public Schools number. We have tip lines at all of our junior high and high schools that people can either report anonymously or they can leave their name. We have an after-hour emergency security line. So we have a lot of different, they can actually go online and fill out a form and send it if they would like. And there's a lot of information on our website about bullying and reporting. So I think the idea of just educating people about what it is, why it's so serious, and then giving them a variety of options to use to report it so that we can do our job.
Okay. Kim, what kinds of peer pressure or group dynamics are influencing teens to participate in group assaults or these swarm attacks?
So we've definitely seen, and we know from past experience, there's this group mentality. You know, it's if I'm a part of this group, I'm not going to necessarily be singled out as the person that committed this act. And unfortunately, I think very recently when we talk about these swarm attacks, what I'm hearing is that these teens are saying or pressuring each other, you know, you're going to be famous, you're going to go viral, you know, you've got to be a part of this, you're just, you know, everyone's going to see this, everyone's going to know. And in that moment, remember I talked about the teenage brain and how they're really not thinking ahead about the consequences of their actions. And so I look at that pressure as just thinking about, you know, what is that instant gratification, not thinking about that long-term consequence of participating in that act that is all over social media.
Karen, what changes would you like to see in Arizona law when it comes to holding violent juvenile offenders accountable, and why those changes?
We see a lot of gun offenses at the juvenile courts, and they run the entire gamut from lower level possession of a gun, first degree murder, second degree murder, armed robbery. Like you were saying, we see a lot of offenses that begin with juveniles going to buy or sell vapes, going to buy or sell a gun, and we see the consequences of them having a gun. The statute minor in possession that we charge a lot of the time. It's ARS 133111. Has a loophole in there that I'm sure the legislature isn't aware of, because I'm sure they wouldn't want this. But basically, if a juvenile has a gun in their home and the parents don't want that gun there, there's nothing we can do. We cannot charge it. It allows a juvenile to have a gun in their own home. If they are someone who is a sports person, maybe they're a sharpshooter at school, they go hunting with their parents, that is fine. But the types of offenses I'm talking about are when parents do not want the juvenile to have the gun in their home. They will call police, the officers go out, and there's nothing we can do. We cannot charge that. We've also had situations where a juvenile has been at a group home and a number of guns have been found, a bag of guns. And again, because that is their home, there's nothing we can do about that. We cannot charge them with having a gun. So I think if we could get that taken care of so that we could charge those cases, it would be simple to add a few words on there with parent guardian's permission. If they didn't have their permission, then that would allow us to charge those cases.
And I will tell you that if you're interested in that law being passed, and I think that is a critical step, it would be very helpful if you called your legislators. Each person in Arizona lives in a legislative district where there are 2 representatives and 1 senator at the state level. Call them and tell them that you would like to see that passed, because I think that would be very helpful to hear from their constituents. All right, Stephen, I got a 2-parter for you. What are the most common misconceptions parents have about teen violence on campus? And what warning signs do they often miss?
Well, I think there's a lack of awareness. I saw one report that in a previous year there was over 500 gun-related threats on Arizona campuses. Realizing that, it doesn't happen on my campus might be a misconception that someone might have. And a misconception that, and in over 20 years of law enforcement, I've never run into a parent that said, oh yeah, I knew my kid was posting threats online. It's usually a surprise, and not being aware of those type of threats happening on campus. I'm really encouraged by some of the guidelines that districts are implementing in regards to the use of cell phones in the classroom and on the school environment. And I've already received positive feedback about those guidelines being implemented. So that's some of the awareness. Maybe parents don't know that stuff happens on their child's campus.
Are there patterns or root causes that you're seeing that schools need to better address, such as bullying, family instability, or mental health concerns?
Absolutely. We're seeing an increase in mental health issues, an escalation in violent behavior. Chronic absenteeism is an issue. There's a high level of anxiety with all of our student population. The social media has a huge impact negatively on our youth. Peer pressure, and then peer pressure and social media go hand in hand. Copycat threats, things like that. So those are kind of the biggest patterns that we're seeing an increase in.
Okay. Kim? Parents often feel powerless, and sometimes they feel clueless, especially with digital media and that type of thing, when it comes to their child's emotional world. So what are some concrete early signs a teen might be headed down a violent or dangerous path?
I think that parents really need to recognize the behaviors that start in their home. This could be overly aggressive behavior with siblings, with family pets, destruction of property, and then even getting those reports, they're not attending their classes, they're getting notices about skipping classes, skipping school. These are all things that are really on the early side of the spectrum that a parent can say, okay, like I need to get a handle on this, I need to check in, I need to get help, so that it doesn't lead to something that's much bigger.
Okay. So Karen, sometimes community members, when they look at the juvenile justice system, think justice is not being served, teens are getting away with their crimes. How would you respond to that concern? Is that legit? Is it not legit?
I believe it's absolutely legitimate. We are bound by the law as prosecutors. We are bound to adhere to the rules. And the reality is the law is for everyone. The law is for the victims. The law is for the juveniles and the defendants in our cases. But I also understand that that can be very frustrating for parents and for victims. And as a prosecutor, I would never ever fault a parent who gets upset at me or has a conversation about their frustrations, because at the end of the day, they are advocating for their own child, and we can never fault that. I think the other part of this is, I know I've spent most of my career in the adult system, and when I moved into the juvenile system, it's very, very different. And I would say it took me a couple of months until I even understood what people were talking about, using a different language, different timelines, different rules. And so I think it's very important for us as prosecutors to educate victims and let them know about the rules and let them know about how the system functions, so that, one, they understand what may happen when we go into court before it happens, but then also to allow them to vent their frustrations and listen to what it is that they're saying, because at times our system focusing on rehabilitation can be frustrating for the victims that are going through the system.
Yeah, here's an unexpected question. As somebody who's been in both adult criminal justice system and the juvenile one, is it true that prosecutors have far less control over the outcome in the juvenile system?
Absolutely. In the adult system, the prosecutors are the ones that wield the power. We decide who to charge, we decide whether to make a plea offer, and we decide what kind of a plea offer to make. In the juvenile system, yes, we decide who to charge and what to charge, but once we get in the system, the plea offers that we make do not involve consequences. Consequences are all left up to the judicial officer, and it is their decision on what they are going to do, and they have all the options open to them when they are sitting there deciding what sentence to give. So in the juvenile system, we play more of a supporting role than we do in the adult system, which is definitely something new to get used to when you move to juvenile, and is absolutely more frustrating for the prosecutors. Because most of the prosecutors, I know for myself, our focus is on the victims. Yes, we're focused on doing the right thing, but we do this because we want to see justice for the victims, and it is harder for us to attain that in the juvenile system.
Stephen, how do school resource officers balance their roles as a law enforcement officer and a mentor in school when it comes to preventing violent behavior before it starts?
Well, being a school resource officer, I see as the most proactive law enforcement position out there. As a patrol officer, we're responding call to call to call and addressing, individuals who might be experiencing their worst day that they've ever experienced. And from a preventative standpoint and a community policing standpoint, a school resource officer is the face of the franchise. when it comes to building relationships with youth, they can be a connector. Not just a mentor, not just another approachable adult. They can be a connector because they're an authority figure. And if youth can have a positive relationship with an authority figure, that translates to their interactions with other authority figures in their life. And then as they connect those youth who might confide in them specific, situations, they can connect that youth or the youth's parents to resources within a district, resources within the community, resources that we've had here today. So they really are that MacGyver or that Swiss Army knife that plays
I'm
so
looking
many
at the
different
audience
roles.
to make sure that they understand that reference.
We're good, okay. And they really have so many different hats that they wear. And a good school resource officer sees their students as their kids. And, it's very common for an officer to, be anxious when they're away at training or one of the events that we organize because they're worried about what's happening on their campus. And they can play such a crucial role in further developing connection within that community. And it has a tremendous impact on the climate. And when it comes to violence and teen violence and things that we're talking about, they can also be a connector with outside agencies, whether it's their own agency or whether it is a outside nonprofit organization. Like there were times when I knew of a conflict and there was rumors of a threat and weapons being involved, and I reach out to our detectives within the Chandler Police Department and let them know, hey, I've got concerns about this young person who had previous incidents. And to get ahead of the game is so much more valuable than waiting to see if something happens. Mm-hmm. And in the case I'm referencing, our gang detective went and knocked on that parent's door because they had previously had a relationship, an interaction with them, and were able to be a prevention. So that school resource officer can really be that connector because, and I'll say it, all the schools that I've been on, I've been known as the coolest cop in Chandler. And so that connection is a lack of a better term, coolness that permeates other officers. And so I always would grin when I'd meet somebody in the locker room at the station that was like, I ran into one of your kids again. And it was a positive interaction, or they talked about you. So it's promoting that positive authority figure in their life. And that translates, like I said, to a parent, to an employer. It could be a teacher, and so forth.
One of the things that we haven't brought up tonight is there was a time around 2020 when, because of anti-police sentiment, school resource officers were removed from campuses at the request of the school or school district. And so it's interesting that we see an impact in the level of violence right around that same time, because as you said, you're not reactive, you're proactive. So.
Yeah.
Al, how can schools and families work together to build a stronger culture of accountability and respect among students?
So I think it starts with establishing clear and consistent expectations, not just from the students, but from their parents, but more importantly from staff as well. That old lead by example. We want to promote positive learning environments, positive culture. We actively promote rewarding for kindness type campaigns. And then I think when it comes down to holding students accountable, we have to be a partner with the parents when it comes to discipline and consistency with behavioral changes. And if I could just say one thing, I think you're the coolest in the state. He was my SRO at Summit Even though it's in Chandler, it's actually a Mesa Public School. And I tried to figure out a way to clone him, and I haven't been able to figure that out, so.
Wow.
Just wanted to throw
So
that
his reputation is even bigger than that?
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
You can pay me later.
Kim, how can families start difficult conversations at home to address some of the things you talked about earlier? Emotional regulation, anger issues, accountability in a way that's going to hit home with teens.
So I think immediately as a parent, we often hear about what our child has done and we want to react to that. You did what? That's not going to resonate with our teens. So when they're coming home from school, you might have already known, you might have already gotten a notice from their school of something that happened. You sit down and you say, not how was your day, tell me about your day. What was the best thing that happened today? What was the worst thing that happened today? Start those conversations. It's so important to exercise that emotion regulation muscle. Don't be so quick to rescue your kid. You know, those feelings that we have when we're in trouble and we have that anxiety in the pit of our stomach or we have to deal with a consequence. It's so important to let your kids deal with that consequence. Work in partnership with your school, with your community. They have to be held accountable for their behavior. You're going to stand side by side with them, but you're not going to rescue them. So making sure that you have those conversations, that they know no matter what, they can still talk to you. It's hard, but we're going to talk in that even tone and just make sure we have that conversation. Get them involved. You know, when you're telling your child after they've done something wrong, it's okay to say, okay, after you've listened to them, you know there's going to be a consequence, right? Like, get them involved in that. They're teenagers. So are we going to have you grounded for a week? You know, your kid's going to be like, no, you know, I only want a day. So that's where negotiations start, and you have to be appropriate with that, but you have to let them have those consequences.
So you might not be cool at that moment.
You're definitely not going to be cool in that moment, but I think after your kiddo reaches that adult after 25, right, then they come back and they're your friend. Yep, but not in that moment.
Karen, we deal with diversion programs that are set up in the juvenile system by the courts. What are some creative diversion programs or interventions that are working to keep first-time offenders from becoming repeat offenders?
One of the new programs that the court started just over a year ago is called Project Safe. And it is for first-time gun offenders. So these juveniles were found by police at the school to have a gun, and they're obviously not allowed to do that. We were seeing, as we've already discussed, an increase in gun cases at juvenile court. So we wanted to look at how could this be dealt with positively. And the courts and probation developed a program in collaboration with both ourselves and the defense bar to provide these juveniles with insight. They do, it's called Journey Do, and basically it's an online program that they can do. They use their own cell phones. They can access it from anywhere, so it's easy for them to do. It asks them a lot of questions, talking about peer pressure, about conflict. How do you deal with that? The juveniles then type in answers to the questions that they're being asked. The probation officers then read their answers, and they can push them a little more if they didn't answer enough, if they didn't go into enough depth. And it really starts these juveniles thinking into what they're doing, why they're doing it, and what they need to do differently next time. There's also a victim component there, and so there are a number of victims. This is in person, so it's not all something they do online. It's an in-person component. And several of those individuals themselves have been shot. Several of them were in wheelchairs and will be in wheelchairs for the rest of their lives. And they just talk about what they were involved in, what they have had to deal with because of the choices and decisions that either other people made, and then they were then shot. Some of them are also what we call credible messengers because they can relate to the kids. Some of them themselves were making poor choices and poor decisions, and they were then shot, and now they're in a wheelchair. And they just have such an ability to reach these young juveniles, to reach their parents. And we're seeing very good results from this. ASU is involved. They do an evaluation component. We're now looking at moving this on to kind of the next level. All of these are non-victim cases, so we're now looking at developing a new portion of the program that would involve victim cases. They're looking at having more of a family component in there, of having mentoring done by Phoenix Police Department officers. And we're also looking at what out of this can we now apply to maybe some diversion programming on the assault side of things. So we're trying to learn our lessons, to learn what works, what is helpful, and what is moving these young people forward. And then we can do more of that and integrate it into other portions of the program or of the juvenile system. So it's started out as in one area, and we're now moving it to other types of crimes and other types of juveniles, and it's very promising at this point.
Stephen, how can school resource officers collaborate better with school staff, counselors, and law enforcement to intervene early before incidents escalate?
So the example I gave about that young person that had some gang ties and having the detective go out and reach out to the parent, that's one. When it comes to collaboration, an officer needs to leave his ego at the door. I think successful school resource officers become a part of the community, that school community, using the same verbiage when it comes to climate initiatives. I think about Chandler High School, the last school I was at. There was character counts, and using the same terminology, the same initiatives, and really being invested in your school community. I also believe that the officer getting to know all of the stakeholders, and there's key people that an officer should be familiar with. That should be a counselor, social worker, obviously administrators, but not leaving out the custodial staff, the night crew, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, when they can be a connector to all those different stakeholders. There's miracles that can happen. And I've seen it on my campuses, and I've heard amazing stories of good things that school resource officers are doing. I think it's very, very, very valuable to remember who you are and what you stand for. Knowing that you're not there to be an intimidator. You're not there to be an enforcer. And when there are times when maybe you need to take you need to take enforcement action, being fair but firm. Some of the best experiences I've had, most rewarding, are when I did have to cite a young person for bringing a illegal substance to campus, and cited them into the juvenile justice. And then they had school consequences. But to have them come back and approach me and let me know how they were doing, and I've had times, I think of recent events where I had to take a student into custody because of threats that they were making towards another staff member, and afterwards, them come up to me and apologize to me for putting me in a position for that to take place. And that only happens with those foundational relationships established in a positive environment. And when I say positive environment, how those students see you. And the most powerful thing in addition to the other powerful things that I keep talking about, is being able to listen. You have two ears and one mouth for a reason. You've heard that before. But even when a student is talking nonsense, just acknowledging that nonsense and being an approachable adult. Like, I can go to Officer Dew and I can tell him about the silly stuff that, the anime that I like, or this terrible band that I listen to. Those are all precursors for communication. And if that student is in difficult conflicts or difficult situation, or they know of somebody, the officer can be a connector to resolving it and be prevention.
Al, what strategies have proven effective in reducing violence in your district and or elsewhere, and that you'd like to see expanded?
So one of the things that we did a couple years ago is we revamped our whole discipline matrix. We have 81 schools, and there was a lot of inconsistencies from school to school. And that might not seem like a big deal, but these kids do talk even from school to school. We had principals that weren't consistent, so that helped a lot. And then the transparency in that matrix to the students and the parents for the consequences for their actions. So it helped them understand, hey, if I do this, this is going to happen, things like that. We have restorative practices that we've implemented, mental health access and early intervention, working with our community partners, even environmental design in our media centers and our classrooms, just to make them look more friendly and nicer to be around. And then I would just like to end it with our great relationship with our school resource officers. I can't say enough how important that role is to bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement, and knowing that they have a safe place to go to. And I've heard endless positive stories where kids have turned their lives around because of that relationship they've built with their SRO that lasts for years.
Kim, what resources are available for parents who think their child might be involved in violence, or maybe they're hanging out with people who are involved in violence, but they just don't know what to do next?
So I think parents, it's really important to step back, and I know it's hard, but there's no shame. I don't want parents to not reach out and call different resources because they feel like they're going to be judged. There are behavioral health professionals out there. If you talk to your school counselor, if you're comfortable with your school, there's community mental health agencies that will assess here in the Valley. There are big ones such as Arizona Children's Association, there's Teros Health, there's Not My Kid. So many community agencies are able to assess because the violent behavior needs to be treated. We need to get to the bottom of where that behavior is coming from. All of these different organizations can assist, and many of them also offer parenting groups, parenting assistance and support as well. I would say if it's actually happening in the moment, if there's a full-blown crisis, you can call 988. That will connect you with behavioral health technicians that will actually come out to your location to help you de-escalate and plan what that next step would be.
Okay. So with that, we're concluding our panel. So a heartfelt thank you for our panelists for being here tonight and sharing their expertise on such a critical issue. So let's give them a round of applause, please. And again, a big thank you to our wonderful vendors who have set up booths outside. This is such an important topic. So I want to thank you also for taking the time to be here tonight. I know this is a school night or a work night for us, and coming out's maybe not the easiest thing. But what we've talked about tonight, while it's very heavy, we're trying to provide helpful and hopeful information to you. So the fact that you showed up means that you care, and that's where change is going to begin. So recognize that teen violence isn't just a problem for the courts or the schools to solve. It's a problem for all of us to solve together. Government is a poor substitute for a family, for a parent. And so if we can provide that information to you as family members of teens or parents of teens, that is accomplishing a lot. So if we speak up, we stay involved, and we refuse to look the other way, we can help protect kids in the community. So let's leave here tonight, every one of us, committed to doing our part, because young people are worth fighting for. And we have seen far too many tragedies in my office that we don't want to see again. All right? The panel will be here if you guys want to come up and ask some questions, but otherwise, have a great night. I don't know if it's storming out tonight, but Karen taught me a British phrase for when the storm is pending, right? Yes. And it's black over Bill's mothers. We don't know who Bill is, we don't know who his mother is, but that's what the British say. So these last few nights, it's been black over Bill's mothers. It certainly has. Okay. Have a good night.